Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the animation panel. This year has been a banner year in animation. And this is clearly shown in the 5 films nominated for Best Animated Film, Oscar. All five films not only have broken new ground in animation, but they have also tackled immediate, serious topics ranging from the environment, how to cope with complex emotions, artificial intelligence, and catastrophe. Unfortunately, director Adam Elliott couldn't join us today. He's the fifth nominee. Currently, he's in Australia attending an awards ceremony. Shame on him. He actually is going to join us on Monday at 11 a.m. for a Q&A following the screening of his film, Memoir of a Snail. But please give a warm welcome to Gins Salbalodis, director of Flow. Oh, sorry. Sorry, my bad. Chris Sanders, director of The Wild Robot. Nick Park, director of Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Must Fall. And Kelsey Mann, director of Inside Out. My goodness, you guys have fans out there.
I guess so. Look at these fuzzy chairs we got here.
So,
Comfortable.
Kelsey, we're going to start with Inside Out. I'm going to be talking to each of them individually at first, and then we'll have a discussion amongst the five of us. So, before I talk to Kelsey, I want to introduce the clip of his film, Inside Out 2, a sequel to Inside Out that features young Riley entering puberty and experiencing brand new, more complex emotions as a result. As Riley tries to adapt to her teenage years, her all emotions try to adapt to the possibility of being replaced. So let's take a look at Inside Out 2. So, Kelsey, I want to right off the bat, when I went to see the film the first time, I was taken aback by how wide the screen was. Tell us about using the 2.39,
Yeah, 239. Yeah,
239
yeah,
aspect ratio.
yeah. You're very astute film goer to notice that. It's
thank you.
actually different from the first film. I got some really good advice. This is the first film that I've directed, and I worked with Dan Scanlon on Monsters University, and he gave me really good advice. He said when he did Monsters University, they asked him the same question: what aspect ratio do you want? And he said, "Oh, what did the other film do?" And they're told him, and he's like, "Oh, let's just do that again." And he's like, I wish I would have paused. I wish I have took a moment to decide what was right for that movie, even if it was a prequel or a sequel. So he's like, and he kind of meant that for a lot of decisions. And it's kind of rung true to me for what I wanted to do with this film, which is do a sequel that really has, that feels like an original. Like we're making decisions that's just for that film. And so I thought about it. It was the first decision I had to make pretty early on because I wanted this, draw and storyboard. And they're like, well, what aspect ratio do you want to work in? And so I paused and I thought about it. And I'm like, well, Riley's getting older, and her world is expanding. So I thought, it'd be really cool if the aspect ratio expands along with her. Plus, I could fit all those emotions in one shot. It was a really long console that they, introduced at the end of the film, so it just felt right.
Speaking of emotions, you introduce anxiety, which is my spirit animal. You know, I was I was blown away by all the different choices you made vis-a-vis anxiety. I noticed that you chose not to uh, use the color orange at the beginning of the movie until anxiety is introduced, and then we start seeing the color orange incorporated into the film. Can you tell us about all the different choices you made to vis-a-vis anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, you have so many. We're all up here representing a lot of people who help make our films, and like that choice to have orange take over the movie that came from my production designer, from Jason Deemer. He's like, it'd be really cool because the movie is all about a takeover, and so he's like, it'd be really cool to show that visually. And whenever Riley's feeling really anxious, we'll try to put a little bit more orange kind of in her environment. And you'll kind of notice that throughout the film, especially when she shows up to the camp, the summer camp, where anxiety is really showing up. There's a lot of orange kind of in that. But the character of anxiety, that she took a long time to figure out. She was there from the very beginning. Uh, both as a story idea, but also kind of in me as doing this for the first time as a director, feeling a little anxious. And to get her character right took lots of different takes. She was always kind of the antagonist of the film, and she was very antagonistic and very much the villain in our first couple passes. And
It's like all about Eve.
yeah, I pitched it like that. I'm like, it's all about Eve, where she's kind of coming in and taking over, Joy's and the older emotions kind of roles and literally sending them off.
But we do sympathize with her at the same time.
Yeah, that came for that took a while to come to, and it went to we have a lot of experts on the film who that we talk to about why we have these emotions. And Lisa Demore was a clinical psychologist that we worked with a lot, and we asked her, like, why do we have it? Like, what's it there for? And she's like, it's really there to protect us, and it's trying its best, and it's the difference between fear and anxiety. Fear is the feeling that you get of a known threat. Like if you see a tiger, you're like, there it is, and you feel fear. Anxiety is the fear of perceived threat. It's like, what's around the corner? What's tomorrow? So she's very smart because she's always thinking about possibilities of what could happen. I need escape routes in this place. Where are the exits? Like she's always like thinking a million things all at once, and it's really there to try to help us. And so when we started to switch her into really, all of her motivations are coming from protecting Riley. We really thought the movie started to really work well when I realized the joy and anxiety were two parents just arguing over how to best take care of their child, but they're both doing it from a place of love, but they're both doing it a little bit wrong. That's in essence the film.
I hope you don't mind me getting too geeky, but I love the cinematography and the choices that you made. For example, vis-a-vis anxiety, that you switch to handheld when anxiety is around. Can you tell us about?
Yeah, and you're really dialing it up at the end of the film with the panic attack scene. We're really pushing the cinematography a lot there at the end, and even adding a little bit of a camera shake to it. Because she has a lot of energy. She's always in fight or flight, and that's kind of what anxiety does to us, in our bodies. And so we kind of wanted to represent that not only in kind of her actions, but also in the cinematography, and even in the music. Like Andrea, what she did, there's a violinist who I think is just she's the voice of anxiety, and you can kind of hear that kind of quivering energy in the music.
One of my, I loved the scene where she's having a panic attack and she's in the penalty box, and you create a sense of depth with the background. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Can
we're pushing the depth of
it's
field
such
there.
a beautifully animated sequence. Can
Yeah.
you tell us about?
It's ironically some of the most beautiful shots in the film are like the worst moments for for Riley, but they're so everybody's operating at such a high level, and I'm looking at all the different departments that put together that shot. It's a layout with the camera and the lens and the lighting there and animation, and everybody's kind of working together to create that feeling. All we're trying to do is try to capture the feeling that you have when you're in a panic attack, and do that in a visual way, hopefully that you can feel. And it's incredibly beautiful, and I couldn't believe what they were able to pull off.
Can you tell us about in the first one we have the islands of personality. In this one, the friendship becomes larger, and then you have the family keeps getting smaller.
Yeah, I've got teenagers, and one of the first. That's honestly one of the first drawings I did on the film was I did a really tiny family island and a gigantic friendship island, and I'm like, this is it's funny. Like now doing the research, I know that to be true, but now doing the research of it, I know why it's true, and they're supposed to be doing that. There's a lot of what we're hardwired to do, including having anxiety show up. But like the shift from family to friends is all about our survival, because you're a teenager is switching from being taken care of to taking care of themselves. So you kind of are actually pushing away your caregivers so that you can survive and get the skill sets to survive on your own. And we're social creatures that need each other to exist. You know, if we're often alone, we're going to die, and so we need each other to live. And so, I think that's why we're hardwired to like want you guys to like me. Do you guys like me? Chris, tell me you like me.
You like you
Okay,
actually
good.
for real,
All right,
yeah.
good.
Another brilliant scene in the movie is the projections team with a cubicle of cards, and then there's actually this 25 millimeter anamorphic uh, uh, little movies
Yeah.
being shown. Can you tell us about coming up with that aspect in the
Yeah, we're pulling from our lives to make these movies, and that came from I can't tell you how many times where I will go home, have dinner, and get ready for bed, and I've got a big day the next day, and my head hits the pillow, and I'm supposed to go to sleep, but my mind just is like, all right, let's get to work, and I just lay there and I just think, and I just keep spinning, and I'm like, we need to put this in the movie. It's I mean, that's really what anxiety is doing, because like I lay there, and like a part of it's worry, what could happen, but you're also trying to problem solve. Do I have that thing? Even for this here, like, oh, did I pack that thing? What am I gonna wear? Do I have the right shoes? Like you're also problem solving too. But then you're just kind of constantly coming up with all of these, we called it worst case scenarios. And we thought that would be such an interesting land. We called it worst case scenario land in the beginning. And then we thought, oh, well, you have to be kind of creative to be able to come up with like what could go wrong. And so we're like, oh, that would be a really great thing if she takes over Imagination Land and uses the power of imagination to have her ruminate and kind of spin. So it all came from that. I think that's all I'm trying to do, especially for a movie like Inside Out. I'm just talking about my life, and I'm talking about either me as a father or me personally, and I'm just trying to tap into things that when you talk about it, you look around the story room and people are nodding their heads and they're like, I know what you're talking about. I did that last night, and then everybody builds upon it. Then they start to tell me something that I'm like, oh yeah, I do that. We should give that to joy or to, anxiety. So you're just trying to find those things that are universally relatable that you can put up on the screen.
Well, the movie was a huge success at the box office and critical as well, and nominated for the Oscar. But before all of this happened, how was and you were making the film and you had to live up to an incredibly successful first film. How was your anxiety level during that whole process?
I mean, yeah, it's funny looking back on it. Sometimes you realize, like, oh, I put a lot of myself up on the screen, more so than I thought, and it was really a battle between my own joy and anxiety of having this opportunity to direct this film. It was filled with a lot of anxiousness, because it's any movie we do at Pixar, we have a high bar, and our audiences have a high bar for ourselves, let alone following a film. I can't tell you, at the beginning, before the film was out, so many people were like, so, Inside Out, it's my favorite animated movie of all time. Maybe my favorite movie of all time. Do you feel any pressure? I'm like, well, now I do. It's a lot. I'm sure we all feel, every single one of us up here feels that pressure because none of us want to make a bad movie. We want to make a really great one. And so.
Well, congrats. You did an amazing job. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Look at the fans out there.
I know you have. So next we will talk to Nick, the great Nick Park. Wallace and Gromit, vengeance must foul. Top dog Gromit springs into action to save his. Nick, I guess you
Thanks,
have
Mom.
fans. Top dog Gromit springs into action to save his master when Wallace's high-tech invention goes rogue and he's framed from a series of suspicious crimes. Let's take a look at Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Must Foul. Well, Nick, I told you backstage, it's such a huge honor to have you here and to meet you. I've been such a huge fan of Wallace and Gromit for so many years, and and
Lovely to be here. Thanks.
and I want to play tribute, give tribute to Peter Sallis, the voice actor who did Wallace for so many years, and then we lost him in 2017. And I was just wondering, how was it for you to do another Wallace and Gromit, but without the great Peter?
Well, yeah, that was the. Thank you anyway as well for everything you've said. That was the big question, really. Doing another Wallace and Gromit, do we have a future? Because but luckily, it was like a gift, that came, before Peter passed away. Actually, Ben Whitehead, who was the new voice of Wallace, he came on board as a background character on Curse of the Were-Rabbit back in 2000, early 2000s, and while if Peter wasn't available, he would stand in as as a reading artist for Helena Bonham Carter or Ralph Fiennes, and we discovered he could do a great impression of Wallace, and he's got better over the years, so he's really been a godsend, really. He's saved the future of Wallace and Gromit.
And tell us about, we've been wanting Feathers McGraw to finally come back after we saw him in the wrong trousers. Tell us about bringing, and how did you guys come up with finally bringing Feathers McGraw back?
Oh, well, thank you. That's my cue for, here he is back. Feathers McGraw. And by the way, this is the original one from the movie, or these are the original puppets from the movie. This is the scale we work with. I'll just put him there for a second. But yeah, originally, it was actually, the idea was just a 30-minute idea for Wallace inventing a smart gnome, or a robot gnome back then, to help Gromit in the garden, as you saw in the clip, with his garden chores. And there was lots of fun about the idea, but it was missing that thing that Wallace and Gromit usually has, like a sinister element. And then tinkered around with the idea for years, and then did other films, and then started to mess around with the idea again, and it was just like a flash of lightning. It wasn't a desire to do a sequel to The Wrong Trousers. It was more to satisfy a story problem, with the lack of a sinister element. And there was Feathers on the shelf, with a history with Wallace and Gromit and a vendetta. So suddenly kind of motored, really put something into the story.
I was fascinated the way you present Feathers McGraw in this film, where we're used to seeing a lot of movement in animation and a lot of action. And with Feathers McGraw, there is so much restraint. There's like every movement, he barely moves, but when he moves, is so poignant. Tell us about how you guys arrived at that.
Yeah, I should just mention my fellow director. We directed the movie together, Merlin Crossingham, who couldn't make it today. But thanks. But we were always saying that to the animators, only about 5 animators would dare animate Feathers McGraw, because he's like an exercise in minimalism and nuance. And we didn't want to, what Steve Box did. He mainly animated Feathers in The Wrong Trousers, and we didn't want to break that idea, so we were very careful to stay, to hold our nerve and not do much with him. And it's strange for animators not to animate, to ask them not to animate something. So it was very much about how he walked in and did very nuanced, minimalist turns, and it was all about the timing. And the only way you could tell his thinking is when he blinks. And we often debated, should he blink twice or once or like Hannibal Lecter, not at all, So,
And the lighting is so dramatic. One of the things I've always admired about your films and how you pay tribute to cinema and other genres. And in this one, you turn film noir, with the lighting, dramatic lighting with Feathers McGraw.
yeah, I think we actually invented a new genre, a new thriller genre.
Gnome noir?
Gnome noir. Yeah, we've got copyright on that, so yeah. But Feathers too. We often referred to one of my favorite movies, Hitchcock's Rebecca,
Okay.
version of Rebecca, where Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper, the way she glides in and out of the light and has that mannequin-like kind of mystery about her.
I'd love to hear mention the other influences in the film. I mean, there is a little bit of James Bond in this film. There is Ealing comedies. There is also Village of the Damned with all the gnomes.
That was a big one, yeah.
You know,
First inspiration.
You know, any others that I've missed?
Probably a few. I mean, we tend to just jump around, from different genres, and it's often when you're setting up a shot, and you think, oh, on the moment, oh, it's a bit like that movie. Maybe we could push it to be a bit more. There was Aliens, with the detector going off, the bleeping on the street. And actually, oh, the gnomes are coming. Oh, actually, no, they're underground. From Aliens, they were actually above in Aliens, weren't they? But, but different ones. Yeah.
Wallace and Gromit, I've always gravitated in this sort of old world field of the 50s, 60s, but now you introduce artificial intelligence and computers. How did you have to fidget with the timeline, the world of Wallace and Gromit?
Yeah, we did because obviously, Wallace and Gromit's is always set in a kind of nether world between 1950s and modern day, and the technology is never that modern, or it's got rivets all over it to somehow, like we for the first time we do actually have computers, but they're all a bit vintage. They're all kind of 1980s. So to have AI was a little bit of an update. But I guess it is a kind of commentary on modern AI, but with gnomes, so we keep the kind of silliness and vintage quality and the light-hearted touch, really. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because I mean the film it is a cautionary tale, but at the same time it's so delightful and entertaining. Is that something that was it hard for you to balance, and it was important for you to have a little bit of a cautionary tale in the film?
Yeah, I mean, we don't usually have anything worth taking home in the Wallace and Gromit films. Wallace doesn't learn anything. That's usually the joke, that he doesn't learn anything. Whereas this, we have actually altered it slightly in this one, where Wallace actually does have a slight arc. And I guess that was the nature of the story, that it was like a kind of existential crisis for Gromit, and that Wallace's hobby, his main interest is actually causing a lot of anxiety for Gromit, and so we had to resolve that, and so there had to be a learning from Wallace.
We should go into Gromit's head. Let's do that. We're together.
Oh yeah. Excellent.
I read somewhere, Nick, that it takes 4.2 seconds each week for one animator. Is that correct?
Sounds about correct. Yeah. If we got I mean, dailies were pretty quick, kind of don't blink sort of thing. But if we got a minute a week across all the animators, a minute a week would be sailing, cruising.
Yeah. And you must have the patience of incredible patience to deal with this.
Well, I mean, probably the same for all of us, really. But I think it's kind of the nature of what we do, isn't it?
What was the shot that took the longest?
Gosh, yeah, there was so many. It's hard to actually say, actually, because there were so many different. Um, I, I, I know one of the shots that took the longest was when Gromit was outside the zoo, or suddenly realised that all the Norbits were in the submarine, and sorry, spoiler there, but, heading into the zoo. That was quite a big camera move around using the motion control camera and keeping Gromit. Just often the shots that where the character is doing very little actually take as long as doing action, because you're kind of watching all the subtlety and tracking everything.
And I mentioned to you that I watched the film. I've seen the film so many times. It got me through the holidays. In one side, in the chase sequence at the end, on one side of the dock, I mean
The canal.
the canal is sunny, and then the other side is like dark and horrible looking. What was that all about?
Yeah, I think we were cheating time quite a bit there, because almost the whole of Act 3 happens over a night and a morning till we get to the actual aqueduct, the bridge. So we had to, each scene we were kind of cheating where the sun is all the time.
And then when it comes to Gromit, we we always know what he's thinking. He doesn't speak. Is that a very difficult task for you to achieve that? The fact that we're able to read his thoughts, but he never expresses himself
In words.
in
yeah.
words.
Sure, yeah. I guess all the animators are trained to do this, because it's one of the most difficult things to do, is it's a real skill that the animators learn of just exactly how much to move the brow, how subtle, how big. And everyone kind of gets it a bit wrong to start with, but we give them a crash course in it. And it all started on the first Wallace and Gromit film, A Grand Day Out, which was my student film. And I remember he was going to have a voice like Scooby-Doo a bit. And it was so difficult to get your fingers around and animate the mouth that I just decided to move the brow. So it was a total accident. But Gromit was born in that moment. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nick, for being here. So next, we're on to The Wild Robot, and director Chris Sanders. After a shipwreck, an intelligent robot called Ruz is stranded on an uninhabited island. To survive the harsh environment, Ruz bonds with the island's animals and cares for an orphaned baby goose. Let's take a look at The Wild Robot. Chris, in this film, there's a painterly quality. When I saw the film in 4K, and you could actually see brushstrokes in the animation. Can you tell us about your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. When I read Peter Brown's book for the very first time, I thought this story is deceptively friendly and really simple in some ways, but the feelings inside it were really vast. And my concern was that if we were to do it in the style that we had been in for a very long time, that we were obligated to, I think, technologically, that it just wouldn't have the sophistication that I felt that it really deserved. Because I was very, very concerned that it would accidentally skew too young. Because I always knew that kids are going to definitely be interested in seeing this film. A lot of kids read this book at a certain grade level even. So I was really concerned about getting adults to see this film and to really appreciate it the way I was appreciating it when I read it. So we had recently made some very big advances at DreamWorks in getting away, breaking free of that traditional CG look that we'd been locked to, and getting a more painterly look on screen. Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and Bad Guys had a really, really nice illustrated look. But I was curious, could we push it even further? In particular, I was referencing Bambi and Tyrus Wong's beautiful, beautiful styling. One of the most amazing forests, I think, that has ever been put on film. That and Miyazaki's amazing forests that he had in Totoro and Spirited Away. So we began to explore, like, could we get a softer, more painterly look? And there was one artist in particular that was in France, Daniel Coucou, and his paintings in particular, I started to focus on as, could this be like our target? Could this be the landing zone? And they were very impressionistic. And he was very, very quick and very relaxed when he did these. He told me later that he's glad he didn't know that we were focusing on his paintings, because he wouldn't have been as, I think, just relaxed as he did them. We made one painting and decided, if we can make this painting move, and we'll be there. So bit by bit, we started to like unlock how to do that. And I actually went to some amazing demonstrations where an artist would sit at a tablet, Baptiste, and he would begin to paint. And it was like he was painting in air, because on the screen, the brushstrokes would appear, but then he could turn it and continue to paint. So he was painting dimensionally. It meant we freed ourselves from having to have structures underneath things like trees and rocks. And it meant that the brushstrokes broke up, because the painting that was our target, it just had little dots for flowers. There was no, like, we were not obligated to put a stem and leaves and all these other things. And so I watched the progress bit by bit. And eventually one day I came into Color Dailies and I was looking at the painting, and they hit a button and it moved, and the camera pushed through it. And all those little flowers passed my screen, just floating in the air. And I was really blown away. And I quietly had this moment of anxiety, because I thought, is it too much? Is it too loose? Am I going to create a film that's going to just be like distracting for some reason? That anxiety was put to rest when we got our characters placed into the scene. And they were likewise surfaced entirely with brushstrokes. And that took quite a while to perfect, because there's different coarseness of brush that's used for foreground, midground, and background versions of those characters. And lots of details, like exactly how we go from one color area to another, like how the transitions work, had to be worked out very, very carefully. But the curious thing that I never expected was that it created a different kind of reality. And it really did evoke reality in a different way. Photorealism is something that we've always struggled with in CG, because things are like, every little hair is distinct, so you try to gather them so they look more natural. But when we got away from that entirely, it was a lot more like when you look at a really wonderful painting. When you're close up, it's kind of nonsense, but as you back away, it pulls together and it has this real, like, reality all its own. And I was looking at this one shot, which was a high wide of a waterfall, and I always like take a moment to look around and not look at the characters. The trees and the plants are just, they're very, very impressionistic, but they feel more real in a way, because they're not over described. So it was just a very interesting effect that we accidentally came across.
It's a very emotional film, and I noticed that the emotions are the music, which is Oscar nominated. Chris Bowers is nominated for. Since there's this long sequences where there is no dialogue, and the emotions are moved, and the story is being moved by the music. Can you tell us about that collaboration?
That all goes way back to Lilo and Stitch. In fact, I was hunting through some videos just this last week, and I was like looking at the videos from the scoring stage, and Alan Silvestri's amazing score was an amazing moment for me. Like, I've never been to a scoring session before, and the excitement and the thrill of seeing some of these themes kick in and develop was tempered by the every once in a while piece of dialogue that came along, and you could, in a sense, hear the orchestra duck down, and here comes the dialogue, and then the music would build back up again. So he was having to weave and maneuver around stuff that I had left and Dean had left. We both had left in the script. And I quietly told myself, if I ever make another film, I'm not going to make that mistake again. So ever since then, I've built what I would call houses for music inside the movies I've written and directed. So Dean and I placed in the most, I think, like, iconic one would be in How to Train Your Dragon, the scene between Hiccup and Toothless in the Cove, where we let the voices just like quiet down, no dialogue. We leave it open to the music, because the music becomes the voice of the film at that point. And that was really important, I think, in The Wild Robot, because I didn't want it to feel like we were on a schedule. I didn't feel like we wanted to feel like we were being pushed along artificially. So Wild Robot has about 50% of the dialogue that a film like that would normally have. So we do have these wide open spaces where the music becomes the voice of the film. Because another thing I'd learned from Alan Silvestri on Lilo and Stitch, he was looking at the story reel and he said, I totally get this. I'm following this perfectly. There's one thing I don't see. Where is that moment where Stitch goes from bad to good? Where's the shift? And both Dean and I were just kind of caught. And we looked at each other like, well, I guess it was sort of like in between. We realized it was in between two shots. We'd left it off screen because we didn't know how to write it. And so we stammered a little bit and said, I guess we left it off screen because we didn't know how to say it. And then Alan said, put it on screen and I'll say it. And it was the dawn of realization broke across my brow. And I was like, oh, music is a storytelling element. It's not just decoration of time. It can do some of the heaviest lifting story-wise. So that was another reason I was very, very excited about handing that immense responsibility to Chris Bowers.
Yeah, especially in the migration sequence is stunning, and the way the two of you collaborated in that moment is spectacular. Congrats. I want to ask you about, there is so many complex themes that you tackle in this film, and you deal with technology and nature. You deal the idea of a journey. There's a journey of self-discovery in the film. There's also, you celebrate diverse family structures. You teach us about empathy and acceptance in the film. Can you tell us about navigating all those different complex themes in the film?
The idea that this film had a mother at its core was so exciting to me. It came from Peter's book, of course, and moms are traditionally and sort of famously missing from films a lot of the time. But here was a movie that was going to have it at its very core. And I think all of it was growing out of that. And the curious thing about the story was that we were attending to what I would say were the two largest load-bearing thematic pillars. That of kindness being a survival skill, and the idea that eventually you may have to change your programming. But that's a moment that you may look back on, you'll likely look back on and be very proud of. So it was more intricate, and I'm glad I didn't know it stepping into it, because I was focused on those bits. I was focused on the relationship between Bright Bill and Roz. But day by day, and you all know this because these things, they develop over time. And eventually the film starts telling you what it needs. And our job becomes, we have to listen. We have to be sensitive to the needs of the film. And these more intricate things started showing up as I was working on the story. And the curious thing about the film in the end is that on a film like Lion King or Beauty and the Beast or Lilo and Stitch, you can go back and you can really easily circle the bits, which are the high points, I think, thematically and emotionally. But this one had them like all over the place. And they developed gradually. So when audiences would watch the film, it was always really interesting for me to ask people, like, what did you catch on? And it was always a surprise what people, like, what triggered people in certain places. And I think it is because of the vast complexity that is a relationship like the one between Bright Bill and Roz.
Last question is about working with Lupita Nyong'o. There should be an Oscar for voice acting in animation.
Here.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, Amy Poehler. Tell us about working with her, because I was blown away about the nuance that the robotic and emotion quality of her voice, and as the movie develops, her voice also matures and develops. Tell us about working with her.
Absolutely. So I cannot praise Lupita enough or give enough credit to the work that she put in on the film. She was very careful about saying yes. We had several conversations before she agreed, because she was very concerned that she be a collaborator in this process. And it was such a perfect pairing, really, and it really made me appreciate Christy Soper, our casting director, because she's not just matching a voice; she really is matching the character of the actor with that of the animated character on screen. So Roz is a really very weird and complex character, and we worked from the very first day to figure out the architecture of her mind, because she's a supercomputer, and if we just assumed that she knows everything, the story wouldn't work. So there had to be very, very selective places where she was not filled with information, gaps in her knowledge, because these were the places that would obligate her to go off script, which with universal dynamics is a big no-no. But that was the whole idea of the film, is that she would have to make a choice to complete a task, which is raising her Gosling, or staying on script. And if she did, she would never succeed. So our very first recording session, we talked for over an hour before we ever even stepped up to a microphone. That never ended. We would just go through every little detail of where is Roz at this point? What does she know? What does she not know? And the voice that changes throughout, we called it a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 voice. Lupita developed that on her own because we needed to hear some kind of a change. So she developed what she would reference like Siri. This sort of like this very cheery programmed optimism. So she would like stress her voice for that hello, and that was our phase 1 voice, and it was this cheery, can-do, optimistic voice. And throughout the film, she begins to relax. She starts using more contractions, and her voice warms, and we have a phase 3 voice by the end. So, as you know, we record these out of order, so we'd have to be very careful to put as much phase 1 voice at the end of the recording session, because it was very, very hard physically on her voice. And we would redo things over the months as we learned more about Roz. So that was one of the most, I think, intense but ultimately rewarding collaborations I've ever had.
Well, congrats. Thank you for being here. And now it's the movie Flow, directed by Gins Silvalodes. The film is not only nominated for Best Animated Film, but is also nominated for Best International Feature. It follows Cat, who is a solitary animal, but is at his home. But as its home is devastated by a great flood, he finds refuge on a boat populated by various species, and will have to team up with them despite their differences. Here's a look at Flow. Yes. Thank you for being here again. So I'll start. I'm actually glad that we show that clip, and it shows the cat seeing his reflection on the water, which the movie starts with that visual, and it ends also with that visual. Tell us about starting the film in that way, and also his relationship to water, the cat.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of have a circular structure to the story to kind of convey how the characters have changed throughout the film. And when I was developing the story, I thought they would return to the exact location, to the cat's home, but it just didn't make sense. So I realized that you don't actually need to go there physically. Having a visual motif can actually be a stronger way of conveying that, and it can just be a puddle that they look at, and it's also not random that it's water that they're looking through, and because the water kind of represents the cat's emotions. So when the cat is afraid of these other animals, the water is very scary and aggressive. But when it starts to open up to them, the water calms down and becomes peaceful and tranquil. So we don't have dialogue, and we have to use these kind of visual cues and our sound cues to explain or kind of show the emotion that they're feeling. And in the beginning, not in this clip, but in the first shot of the film, yeah, the water is trembling to kind of represent the anxiety. I feel like this is a theme we're coming back to. But later, when I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, the water calms down at the end.
Also, he climbs and keeps moving away from the rest. Tell us about I can tell you my interpretation, but I'd love to hear from you directly the reason why he keeps climbing away throughout the movie.
Yeah, so cats do that. They climb up trees when there's something chasing them, and sometimes they get stuck there. And so, yeah, the cat in this film is running away from problems. Basically, it runs away when the flood comes. At first, it climbs up on its house and just waits for it to go away. Basically, putting its head in the sand and just ignoring the problem and not fixing it. And later, when they're in the boat, everyone is fighting and arguing, and the cat just decides to go away and climb up the boat's mast and just waits for the problem to go away. And ultimately, they reach these towers where the cat thinks it will just. That's where it can run away from the flood. That's the furthest away it can climb, and yeah, it does climb away from the problems, but it also escapes the positive emotions. It escapes its fears and escapes yeah, the dread, but also there's nothing there. There's emptiness, and so it has to realize that it needs to kind of. At that scene, we're entering in a kind of a magical realism kind of direction where we're leaving kind of the logic of the real world and kind of expressing the feelings through a more abstract way. And basically, they get lost in this fantasy land where it's in their head basically, and it has to realize that it needs to climb back down into reality and jump back into the coldness of the water and feel that and allow it to kind of take over. But yeah, so that was important to kind of, yeah, the environments are really kind of like they're not, again, they're not random, they're not kind of there to look good. So the whole world is basically designed to help me to challenge the characters or to kind of have them force them in this confined space to kind of convey what they're feeling. So yeah, it was. It's all kind of there to create emotion. Really, that's the goal, to kind of create emotion.
Your camera work in this film is so expressive. It becomes immersive. Tell us about your approach to the storytelling through the camera.
Yeah, that is really important because without dialogue, there's a gap that we're kind of left that has to be filled with other elements. And so the music, the sound, the visuals, the animation, and also the camera have to fill that gap. And to me, that was very exciting because I could push these elements a lot further than in a typical film using dialogue. So I can have the camera, it's not there just to function, not just to kind of tell it in the most direct way. It's there to kind of convey what the characters are feeling. And I think it works in a film like this because, yeah, if there would be like, if I would make like a film with an actor and I would shoot a performance, I would maybe like dial it down. I would just let the actor do their job. But I think in a film like this, in animation, you can push things a little bit further. You can be more expressive, and so the camera can convey fear or curiosity or joy just through the movement. It's almost like dance in some way, or music, which doesn't need to be explained. Either it works or it doesn't, and there doesn't always need to be a logic behind it. So it's very intuitive. But yeah, the way I created the camera is I don't use storyboards. I create a 3D set, which I would kind of explore with a virtual camera, and I can make discoveries and find happy accidents. And so I place the characters inside the scene and do like the basic poses, but they're not animated yet. But I can already put lights in this scene. I can put some effects like fog, which influence how I frame these shots because the way that the shadows are cast on the ground or that really influences where I place the camera. And I might build a set kind of thinking of, well, I will shoot this main subject and that's the focus. But when I walk around with this camera, I notice a background detail and I might figure that let's focus on this detail, which wasn't planned. So it's a very organic, intuitive process. And another reason why I need to do this is because I wanted to have very long shots in this film. And there are two shots which go on for almost 5 minutes
5 minutes.
each. and it's really hard. I don't know if it's possible to draw that in storyboards where the perspective changes so much, and the camera starts with a close-up and goes into a wide shot, and then dives underwater, and then up in the air, and it turns all every direction. So this was, I think, the only way I could kind of convey this. But I do this myself because I don't know what's going to happen. It's almost like writing another draft of the script, and I'm not too kind of rigidly following the script. I'm allowing kind of to be influenced by these discoveries, and sometimes new ideas are added, and something that worked on the page doesn't work when you're trying to visualize it. So you need to be kind of open and flexible to new ideas. And so yeah, it was very kind of organic. And but yeah, I wanted that long takes to kind of create that sense of immersion, that you feel like you're inside this world, that you're not kind of watching a film with like a conventional kind of coverage. It's really, every shot is unique. Isn't like a set of guidelines, and I don't know if a shot will be 5 seconds or 5 minutes. There's no like rules. It's very kind of spontaneous. But yeah, that was really important to kind of express the characters through camera.
You also composed the music for the film, and the music is integrated to gently guide us through the story, through quiet moments. Can you tell us about integrating the music?
Yeah, the word integrated is very well suited. That was what I also used to describe it, because the music I start writing when I'm still writing the script. It's not at the end of the process in post production. It's really the first thing I do, even before the script sometimes. And so yeah, I need to do that because it's kind of, when you're starting to make a film, it's very kind of out of focus. There's some like blurry shapes in your mind, but it takes a lot of effort to kind of find the shape and to kind of find the specificity. But having a piece of music can really, at least it really inspires me. It becomes more clear what I'm trying to achieve, and I need to do that to kind of find the film. And it's also very useful that I don't have to use temp music from other films. I can edit the film using the original pieces, and I can yeah, and yeah, the music is also really important because there is no dialogue, so it has to express these things. And some of these things are really hard to articulate with words. They're very kind of emotional and raw. And if I could express them, I wouldn't need to make this film. So the music kind of expresses things that you can't express with words. It's very kind of, yeah, it's very instinctual for me, and it's really hard to convey the idea through just the script. It conveys maybe the mechanics of what actually happens, but there are some of these emotions which are very kind of complex and can only be expressed with music. So that really helped to kind of, when pitching, when kind of looking for funding, but also when working with the team, it kind of allows us to find like the common kind of through line and kind of all make the film with the same tone, that there's no clash of kind of different tones happening at the same time. But yeah, music is my favorite part because animation is so slow. It takes months to do just a few minutes sometimes. But with music, you can create something in an hour or two, and it's almost gives a greater effect to the overall experience than those 3 months that the animators would spend, because music is so, it's like half of the process include with the sound. It's like half of the impact of the film comes from that. And so that's, I really like, we spent a lot of time on that. But I also just want to point that I had a co-writer on the music who, because I didn't study music, I don't play instruments, I just write it electronically. So the other composer is much more experienced, Richard Zaljup, and he would really like orchestrate things and make it more cohesive, because I don't write like specific themes, but he would make sure that the cat's theme develops throughout the film, and there's these live motifs, and then we would record everything with real orchestra, and so yeah, it was both like I'm very hands-on and involved, but it's also very collaborative and with every aspect, not just the music.
Um, I want to ask you about, there's two journeys actually happening. In the forefront, we have the cat, but you also have the dog that is, they're on opposite journeys. figurative and literally at the same time. You can tell us about the two journeys.
Yeah, the cat kind of starts out being very independent and self-sufficient, and throughout the journey, the cat learns to be more trustful and collaborative. But I didn't want to have like a. I think life is more complicated. They're not the answers aren't that simple, and I wanted to show that there's also being independent can also be good. And so the dog starts out being very trustful, the opposite of the cat, and always looking for someone to tell them what to do. But throughout the journey, it becomes more independent and it starts thinking for itself. So I think it's really about the balance of these things and finding that the compromise and I wanted for the audience to figure out what's the right balance for them and to show the positives and negatives about these ideas.
I'm actually going to ask you a question and start opening it up to all the panelists. The last question to you is about the fact that we're used to seeing animals in animated films that have human uh, that look like humans and act like humans. You go against that, and also Chris in the Wild Robot. Can you tell us about moving away from representing um, uh, animals in film, resembling human behavior?
Yeah, well, the cat and the dog are inspired by real pets I've had, and I just find them really interesting and funny and emotional. So I don't feel like we need to change them in any way to tell a story. And just it was important to create a very subjective experience that you feel like you are the cat in this film, and we see everything and learn information in sync with the cat. So the cat doesn't know where the humans went and where the flood is coming from. So that we don't know as well. And I wanted to make you feel like you're a cat, and I think it's very exciting to do that, to go to a theater and experience the world through a cat's point of view. And but yeah, it was. It's really challenging animating cats because they don't seem to follow the rules of physics. They're very stretchy and bendable and almost act like liquid at sometimes. It's very hard to kind of pin them down. So it was quite challenging, and we recognize real cats and dogs because we know them. We've seen them so much. So if you're not exactly right, everyone will see that it's not perfect. So we had to really pay attention, especially to the eyes, to add these micro movements so that they don't feel mechanical. And but yeah, I feel like it becomes more emotional. When watching films, we really, I think, seeing an animal, become very attached to them because I guess through evolution, they've kind of, especially, I guess pets especially, have grown to look very cute and appealing, and we want to care for them. And so immediately we get attached to these characters by just them being real cats and dogs. And yeah, there's. I feel like that this is something that hasn't been done as much. And that's very exciting. That there have been like cats and dogs in films, but usually they're not the main characters. Like they're kind of the sidekick. But I was very excited about having like these real animals as the main characters.
Chris, um, do you think that this is now a trend in animated films to move away from animals acting like humans and letting them be animals? Because in your film, you also move away from that.
It's such a good question. I will see a movie with like I'll see any movie with animals, robots, or submarines. I will just go. It doesn't matter. And the animals, yes, animals as animals is something unusual because usually they have jobs and cell phones and they're on schedule. Um, and I wonder, like, what is this thing why are they so good at telling human stories? And I have to credit my wife, Jess, for, I think, crystallizing it. She said, there's so many things that are not there. With a robot, you remove so many things, and the same would be, I think, true for an animal. You remove these things that might distract you. You remove, for the most part, there's no gender, there's no age, there's no regionality. So there's all these things that might possibly distract you from the purity of the journey emotionally that you're telling. And I think that I thought that was just such a brilliant observation. I think it's very true.
I want to ask all of you because I was struck, and I mentioned when I introduced the panel that not only have you guys brought so much innovation to animation this year, it's a remarkable talent. But also, all of the films that you have made, you have shown us animation's capacity to deal with serious topics. And was it, as some of you do family programming as well, is it hard to balance this with entertainment? Is this something that we're going to see more in animation, tackling serious topics? I mean, Nick, you deal with AI and the impending dawn of technology.
And gnomes.
And gnomes.
Too. He tackled that subject. Take those suckers down.
The question is about tackling.
I threw you off with the gnomes. I'm so sorry.
You know, tackling serious topics while entertaining, is that something that is hard to balance? And then,
I can only speak. I mean, personally, I think we. Just thinking off the top of my head, really, but I think personally, with these films, we always aim to be entertaining first, and if a theme arises, that's great. But in this film, I think we didn't want to preach in any way. We wanted to, rather, there was a theme, and it was more about, Gromit. Funnily enough, Gromit's the human, really, and shows humanity against machine. I know, interesting, we're all dealing with similar elements, but saying different things. But it's all metaphor, really, for something. It has to be. Otherwise, there'd be no meaning in any of it. But we tried to disguise it all and be entertaining, really, on the surface. And if there's something to take away, well, in fact, we kind of wear the theme, if you like, rather than say it. And it's actually, I guess it's a meta kind of thing, because the stop frame animation is all handmade. The voices are real people. There's no AI in sight, kind of thing. And that's a kind of what the film is also about.
Kelsey?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like, my first thing is to make a movie that's really fun and entertaining. But I want it to be about something and saying about something deep and meaningful, especially with this film. I wanted to go into Riley's life and go into, something a little bit, again, go back to my original thing of thinking of the film as an original versus a sequel. How do we further the story? How do we go into deeper themes and more complex emotions? And I thought I'd hit a little more resistance, to be honest, especially when we came to the end of the film. And I always pitched it as an All About Eve movie where anxiety was going to take over. So I knew she'd be all over the console and she would be really pushing Riley. And we did some stuff earlier on where Riley was kind of breathing heavy and being overwhelmed, when we didn't quite open the door of going into a full panic attack. Part of me was a little worried that I wouldn't be allowed to do it. But we really felt that moment, even when it was small. We're like, wow, we're always looking for stakes in our film, and you're caring for the characters and you're worried about them. And we were trying other things with Riley. We were actually putting her in physical stakes too. She was like up in the rafters at the ice rink, having her kind of overwhelmed with anxiety. And we found we didn't really care about that. We're like, I don't even know why she got up there. What is she doing up there? The part that was really relatable was her being overwhelmed by her anxiety. So we put her on the ground and we put her in the penalty box, and we put her in a place that was more relatable, just on the ground. And it's caused from an action that she did right before she goes in the penalty box. She's so caught up in wanting to achieve and to impress that she checks one of her best friends. And she didn't do it on purpose, but she was just so in the moment, and she's full of spinning and self-hate, really, for what she's done. And we went full panic attack with it. And I really thought that people at the studio would tell me I shouldn't do it. And I certainly thought it when I took it to Disney and showed, you know, Bob Iger and Alan Bergman. I thought they're going to tell me I can't do this. Like, what are you doing? You cannot put this in a family film. And I was all prepared to defend it. But I found every single time I never had to say a thing about it. And I got nothing but support. And that's what's, I feel so fortunate to, you know, work in the industry I do, because people support great films and great animation. And it is a combination of the entertainment, but also going and putting something meaningful in your film.
Chris, is that a hard balance for you to be aware of entertaining while, you know, carrying a message in your film?
I think that we locked into the emotional, I think, the more weighty side of this thing, I think, really quickly, because that was the thing that compelled us quite a bit. You have to balance it with humor, I think, because you need all those wavelengths. You're not going to get those emotional depths unless you have like light things as well. So just attending to all those different things was always something that you're always attending to. You can't keep people in this really emotional place for very long, because you get numb to it. So it's just, I think, a requirement of just the thing that you're doing. It's part of the structure of the film. In our case, we didn't have dialogue-driven humor. It was going to be physical, and it was going to be like really led by animation. Again, we had so little dialogue. A lot of times when you're listening to you didn't have this problem, but a lot of times when you're listening to like a story reel and it's like almost non-stop dialogue, and you can look away and you're still laughing because it's really funny stuff. But we let the studio know that we were going to have the emotion arrive right away, but it was going to be months before the humor arrived. And I think everybody did a really nice job of, I think, controlling their anxiety as the months ticked by, and it just wasn't like getting funny. And then as soon as we had the animation come in for the sequence where Roz, she goes offline and little raccoons arrive and they strip her for parts, they saw the humor, and I could feel the collective sigh of relief that we had a balanced film at that point. I think that was just, I think that was for myself as well. That was like a very affirming moment. I relaxed at that point.
Gintz, is it difficult for you to balance the two, entertainment and you know, driving home ideas and themes?
Yeah, when I start, I don't really think about a message. It's really all about the emotion, about the experience of it, and hopefully throughout the process, these ideas and emotion, the ideas and kind of meaning emerges organically. Because I'm kind of afraid if I start with that, it will be kind of too simple. I need to kind of find my way to it, and but yeah, it's like there's this flood in the film, and like that's kind of like that could be a difficult subject. Like after a long day, we don't want to watch something that's very kind of traumatic and like that. So, but because it's kind of because there's lightness to it, because there is kind of comedy and adventure with these kind of animals, it can actually, people might want to see that, and it can actually reach an audience who might not otherwise want to see something about a topic like that. And so that was kind of about kind of balancing the light and the darkness, about kind of sending that idea. But yeah, it's really there are some things that I still can't really explain as a message. It's really about kind of I think it's enough just to feel things, and maybe it's okay not to explain everything. And so that's my number one goal. And but yeah, I need to find something that I care about, because it takes so long to make a film like this. So I'm looking for like a personal aspect, that's something, a topic I care about, but I don't even know what it means. It's almost like a therapy for me. Throughout this process, I'm learning stuff, and not just, I'm learning stuff about myself and making, like, understanding these things. And so that's part of the appeal of making films, because yeah, it's not just a job. It's I think I can learn things and grow throughout the process. And yeah, and it really like reveals itself throughout the process. I don't know, like when I started, I didn't know what the ending will be. It took some time to kind of discover it.
I actually, one question I've been dying to ask all of you, because you all have brought in all, old techniques, you hand drawing, or you use clay, but you also, all of you have combined modern technologies. Some of you use a little bit of CGI, etc. Can you tell us about that balance of combining old techniques, hand painting, etc., and modern technology, and how do you see this evolving in the future of animation? Chris?
Um, I started out in the hand-drawn days. We all had pencil sharpeners, and everything was hand-painted. And I think everybody will agree that there was an analog warmth that is irreplaceable. It's beyond explanation. It's just something that it flows out of the artists. And I think the really exciting thing that's going on right now is that I feel like technologically we've come out of a tunnel, really, and everything's possible again. When CG came along, we got these amazing gifts. We could move a camera in dimension, and there's a huge emotional component that comes from that. But we were obligated to leave those hand-painted, hand-drawn things behind. And now I think technology has allowed us to reconnect with that. I really do feel like we've gone on this journey and we've reconnected with animation's origins in the most amazing way possible. And we've brought along with us all this wonderful technology, lenses and cameras and these details that we'd never had before. And so now I think the future is really and truly thrilling. That, like, the individual, I think, styling is like wide open now. I think everything is possible.
Nick, do you agree?
Yeah, in our own case, yeah, I mean, the film is essentially, as you said, what's the word you use? Oh, yeah, well, anyway, handmade, but that term you use.
Human touch.
Analog, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it is essentially all the character animation, but there are many effects in the movie, just like in any film, where we need things you can't do with clay, you can't use cotton wool for fog, for example, or we couldn't use cling film for all the water on the canal, so, and sometimes that kind of, using something real like that and tactile can be distracting from the story. So, we use quite a lot of digital water in the film at the end, but it had to fit in with the stop motion. We had this great digital team who were very sensitive and responsive to the needs. So it is, we do embrace the tech, yeah, very much.
And you, Kelsey?
Oh yeah, I mean, I agree with what everybody said, and you talk about the future of animation and technology. I mean, just look at like what I love traveling around with these guys because, like, look down and look at all of our films and how different they are from one another. I feel so fortunate to work in this field of animation because there's so many different possibilities that we can do, and it does feel like it's like wide open with what you can do with the future. It's pretty amazing. To me, it always comes down to me for story. What is the story that you're trying to tell, and what's the best way to visually tell that story, and to have that toolbox just open up even more so. It's quite thrilling and exciting, and I can't wait to see who's going to be sitting up here next year talking about the wonderful films. Animation has had one hell of a year. It's been incredible. Not only the films that are represented here, but all the films this year have been incredible.
Gins, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, well, technology is just a tool, and now I think it's really great that we have these tools, and we use like a free software and to make flow, and we use like basic consumer PCs, and so I think we've gotten over that. We've kind of reached these tools are as good as they should. Like, we can tell whatever stories we can come up with, and I think it's really the story that's the most important part. And but yeah, we wanted to kind of, now that realism has been achieved, it can be, you can render everything realistically. It's kind of, where do you go from there? And I think the same thing happened when photography was invented. Then the painters went into all these crazy directions, into abstractionism and expressionism and all these movements, and maybe leaving the reality behind, because then you can express certain things you can't through reality. And I think it's something similar also happening now in animation, that I feel like this is like the beginning of something, and there's so much yet to explore, but there isn't like one direction. When you're going for realism, it's very objective, either it's real or not, but this time it's kind of going in, it's very subjective. It's kind of, I think it's some ways easier to make something realistic because you can describe it, but when it's kind of more stylized and abstract and handmade, it's really very subjective, and everyone imagines that in different ways. But that's very exciting because you can express your feelings through that, and so yeah, that's I feel like this is just the beginning of something that's so that I'm feeling very optimistic about like the future of animation.
I can't recall a richer group of people nominated for the Oscars in the animated category. I mean, there's always one or two that stand out, but all five, I mean, Adam is not here, but all five are remarkable, remarkable, remarkable achievements. And we're so honored to have had you here today. Thank you so much for your presence. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.